Hey there guys, and welcome back. It has been a full week since the last video, last stream. Let's talk about what's been going on. So this right here, we'll start with this guy because you guys know what this is. In theory, this would be the controller, joystick. This is the joystick. Couple things happened here as I've been working on it. Gonna be a little hard because I printed this in black, but you see how bad that overhang is? That's me trying to print this without supports. It actually worked out decently, and there's a couple things that not a couple things. There is something that I tried that I've seen before, and I never really needed it because I never print like this. But I went and added I think it was a 1mm cover to this. Basically, I just extruded out these holes 1mm to allow it to get the first couple layers down, and then I just drilled and cut it. So these little holes I drilled out with my 3mm or actually 5mm bit, because these are 5mm holes. And then the center hole I just took an X-Acto knife on, and it just cut right out. So that was a neat trick that I got to use because that I don't normally get to use in order to print stuff with bad overhangs that you normally wouldn't be able to. When you're printing this shape like this, I should say, with these holes in the middle of a bridge, the printer will try to print, and it'll print just fine up until it gets to the holes, right? And then it's printing in the line, so it hits the hole, and then it goes back to the start. And you can see how that doesn't really work, because the end where it stopped at the hole, that string that it just printed just falls straight out. So it's obviously doesn't work like that. So like I said, I extruded 1mm in, and that allowed it to put the first couple layers down, so it had a base to print on top of, and then it could start printing the rest of the holes. But like I said, it does look like crap, on the bottom. Doesn't necessarily matter. I did say before that doesn't necessarily matter because you're never going to see it. It's always going to be on the bottom, and so long as it's structurally sound, which it is structurally sound, it doesn't really matter what it looks like, which is why I was okay doing this. Otherwise, what I will probably change in the future is back to this is, let's see, what angle can you see best? I guess right there. Obviously, when we design this, we designed these at different lengths, which is not something I normally do, but I decided to go with it for looks. I will be changing that back, so I'll just make this completely flat so that both the top and the bottom are parallel edges. And then it could just be printed like this without supports, no problem, and it will look perfectly fine. So I'll change that moving forward. Otherwise, the other thing I changed so far with the joystick is I took this base right here and moved it to a separate file from the handle. I actually copied the file, deleted out the handle, the palm joystick handle, and made this its own unit, because in the future, if we ever want to make more joysticks, more specialized joysticks, now we just have this base with the micro switches on it, and we can just go from there. All we have to do is design the part on top. So that's another thing I did. I did that on my free time at work because, frankly, we did not have any streams this week because I was freaking busy. So one of those things. I guess I could have let off with that one, but yes, obviously I did not have any streams this week. Unfortunately, I have been feeling really, really bad about that because it's something I want to try to keep on top of, but it's just one of those things, time constraints and working on these projects in my free time. One of those things, I only have just so many hours of free time during the day that I'm not working and doing other stuff. So unfortunately, with all this other stuff that I've been trying to get done, did not have any time to stream, and that is just what it is. But hopefully I will be streaming more this week because, again, this past week was playing catch up. So next thing to note, these clickers, you'll notice, micro switches, clickers, these micro switches that I got for the joystick, you'll notice that their flange actually comes way out past the end. So I'm going to do a redesign on this. I only just got these on Friday. These only just showed up on Friday. So I'll be doing a redesign on this to accommodate that. So this will be looking a bit different, but one of those things, again, did not have any time to do nearly anything. So that has not happened yet, but will be happening. And that's why that will look slightly different when we get there, when I get this completed and you guys get to see it. Which of these projects do we want to? Actually, you know what? Let's leave these guys because you guys don't know about these guys till later. And let me pull up VS Code to talk about the streaming program. Streaming animation program, rather. So, animation program. I went ahead and I fixed this. So, this dither equals dither, image.dither. I did not have this here before. I did not realize that there was another argument in here called matrix, and evidently image.dither.none is a valid argument for matrix, which is a really bad situation to be in because it does not throw errors when you pass matrix dither.none. So everything looks like it's working correctly, and then you get an image that is dithered, and that's a problem. So figured that out, added dither equals, and that makes sure that our parameters are in the right place. Next thing right here is this image this is just image, so image.point, and basically this takes, for each band of the image, RGBA, it takes that band, and for each value the pixel can be, 0 to 255, it passes it through either a matrix or this function right here. And basically what this function is doing is it's taking that value and it's saying, is that value greater than 0? Yes, then maximize it. Set it to 255, otherwise leave it to 0. And the reason I'm doing that is because the convert function is rounding, and it's rounding up and down, not just down, which means that when we look at my sprite right here, let's grab the one walking down so you can see my face. These darker colors on the bottom, we're getting rounded to black, and these lighter colors up top, we're getting rounded to white. And that's a problem because I need all of this. What I wanted was for the background, the transparency, to be black or to be white rather, and the foreground, the character, the sprite, to be black. That's how we were going to do our masking. If my pants are white instead of black, that causes some issues. So we had to implement that to make sure that my whole entire body ended up black. And that's what that did. The next thing is, let's look. I went and fixed that, and everything looked like it was, I wasn't getting errors. Everything looked like it was going all right. Except for right there. So I'm going to click off and click back on. You see right there where I step over the desk, obviously that's not supposed to be happening. We implemented collisions. Collisions are supposed to be working. So I went attempted to fix that. I attempted to troubleshoot that. And I found there was just way too many things interconnected, and I was having difficulty tracking down what exactly was going wrong. Now, for a program, a module as interconnected and as complicated as this guy, I would normally have unit tests. I would normally start out with unit tests. I mean, I might write a little bit of code first, but I would normally do a primarily test-driven development process where I write a test and then I write a function to pass that test, and the function being the function I was intending to write in the first place. So, for example, with collisions, I'd say, okay, make sure that in this situation a collision is going to arise from this find collision function, and then I'd write the find collision function to make sure that it passes the test, and I'd check for edge cases. I'd, try different things to make sure that in all these situations I can come up with that it would properly fail or pass as expected. And if it didn't fail or pass as expected, that means my function is wrong, not the test. So the function would have to be adjusted to meet my expectations. That's how I'd normally run a module this complicated, this interconnected. That's not how we were doing it, and the reason we're not doing that is because that process of nailing down these test functions and defining them and then going through and nitpicking stuff is really tedious and it's not really good for stream, and therefore I skipped it. So, because it's just not something, that you're going to want to sit through with me. So, for that reason, I started implementing tests. That's a bad example. So I started implementing unit tests, all right? And I'll be implementing those off the stream because, again, it's just way too much checking and defining and just very repetitive work. So once that is all done, once I have everything nailed out, we'll come back to this and we'll continue where we're at, which again was going to be pathing in basic AI. So until then, just know I'm working on it in the background, and once I have everything tested and confident it's working correctly, then we'll come back to it. I won't be doing unit tests on stream because again, that is tedious, but in my off a stream, when I can find the time at any rate, I will be writing unit tests going forward. So that is everything on the animation program, which moves us back to the other projects that I have been looking forward to introducing you to, but unfortunately have gotten a bit stalled. Now this guy, I'm not going to say what exactly move this guy out of the way. I'm not going to say what exactly this guy is, although you can probably take a guess based on some things you're seeing over here, which actually may not be showing up well enough on the camera. But this is the project that I've been teasing for a while now. And this basically comes down to being good enough, because originally I said I was going to just slap this together and it was going to be what it was, and it was just an introduction to the concept that was a fun and interesting introduction. And then I said, you know what? This was during the pixel art stream. I was talking about this. I said, I should really, if I'm going to put this much effort in, I may as well go whole hog. And that's basically what we did come down to. So I was trying to do a lot of this with what I had around or what I was going to be using. Unfortunately, we got most of the way there. I am still waiting on some part that I had to order through a third party that I don't normally order from, and that is taking much longer than I expected. So that's slowing it down on one part, but I also had to swap out this, which I was trying to do with just basic components, for this, which is a dedicated board, because this was just plain not cutting it. And if I'm going to put the effort in, I don't want crap. So this guy, as it turns out, is a combination of the example sketch for this guy not quite lining up with documentation and documentation winning. And the other thing that happened with this guy is I had some incomplete knowledge on how on the difference, I should say, between serial and software serial for Arduino. So that cost me, like, let's say 2 or 3 hours trying to figure out why these were not communicating over UART. So that's the catch up on this guy. This guy, again, most of last week was what I was working on. Just troubleshooting stuff. This guy up here on the end was another thing where this thing is a weird situation where I tested it. When I tested it, it worked just fine. When I put it all together with the rest of the plastic, it stopped working. And as it turns out, the testing it originally, I missed a part, at least as far as I can recall, I missed a part. And it just happened to work. I just happened to get lucky and it worked, and therefore I didn't troubleshoot it and double check myself at the time, which meant that I spent even more time than it would have taken me, because I was reading the documentation at the time when I first did the initial tests. But after that, when I put it all together, then it was a matter of, oh, wait a second, I already read the documentation, so what exactly is going wrong? And I did not go back to the documentation to figure out that I was missing a part. So that's what slowed me down over here. Is just basically in between some hardware changes that had to happen, and then obviously, like I said, I'm still missing a little bit, a last piece to this to get it completely polished off. This, for the record, I only just finished off this morning. I only finally got this solved, this whole entire situation solved in between A, the software serial, and B, the example sketch not exactly working as the example sketch was intended to work. So this guy is on its way, unfortunately not quite there yet. Moving on to this mess right here. So I'm actually quite happy with this. I call it a mess, but I actually am not so sad about this guy. And I don't need this popsicle stick. I took this popsicle stick because I need it for something else. So this is an interesting one, and I was looking forward to telling you guys and doing stuff with this morning, or this afternoon rather. Unfortunately, this first batch did not work out. So because this first batch did not work out, we're going to have to wait at least till Monday, hoping that batch number 2, which will be done, basically midnight tonight, will work out. But what this is, well, if you guessed that this is black epoxy, you are 100% correct, but you're not quite correct. Because this is not just black epoxy. This is black because it's got graphite powder in it. And the reason it's got graphite powder in it is because I read that graphite powder is conductive. And the reason I read that was I was interested in making some custom, interesting, artistic looking, basically potentiometers. So I needed a wiper, something that conducts with some resistance that I could basically make in any shape. And there's a few different ways of doing that. But one way that I saw was mixing graphite powder with epoxy. I have the epoxy, so just getting the graphite powder was the only thing. This batch, for the record, was about 7 ounces. Well, this isn't all of it. There's more of it that's either A, got thrown out, or B, is over here. Actually, I don't have my camera on this, so I can actually show you. Since I had extra, and I knew I was going to have extra, I've been meaning to do this. This is the top of a microwave transformer that I use to weigh down the lift pod that I keep the camera on when the camera is not on top of my monitor. It's on the side view. So I've been meaning to epoxy this together to keep it together because it falls apart. It's delaminating. So since it's delaminating, I wanted to do something to stick it together. So that's where some of the epoxy went. Otherwise, a lot of the other epoxy got thrown out. But point being is this batch was, for the record, as I said, about 7 ounces. That would be weight ounces, not fluid ounces. So 7 weight ounces of epoxy with 2 tablespoons of graphite powder. One of those things, never done this before and could not find any information really on the internet on what a proper mixture would be. The next batch is 7 ounces, or is 5 ounces rather, 5 ounces of epoxy with 4 tablespoons of graphite powder. So double the graphite powder in 7 minus 5 is 2. 2 divided by 7 is about a third-ish. So a third less epoxy with double the graphite powder. We'll see how that works. Also, just to make sure, because I'm paranoid, I did take a multimeter to the epoxy powder before I poured it in to make sure that it had some conductivity. I did see on some other products that people were saying that they had mix-ins that were making them non-conductive and they wanted them for conductive paint. So I double-checked that one. I was getting a reading through the multimeter, so does appear to be conductive. Last thing to say about this is a 3D printed mold, and this guy's here because this guy was a pain in the butt to use and I don't intend to use him again. I was curious on what different sizes. Actually, let me grab this guy too. I was curious on how the size changed things. Okay, so I printed this guy out originally. I made a serious mistake with this guy, a couple serious mistakes with this guy. First being is that I did not get my print settings, because this is printed with 5% infill, which is very, very low. I did not compensate for that on the layers to make sure that I did not have holes in the floor. And as you can see, you can mostly see it on, let's see, that guy. I'm trying to look at the camera and point at the same time. So you can see on this guy, you can clearly see the holes in the floor. The rest of these do have holes in the floor, so I couldn't use this guy at all, which was a waste of plastic and made me very, very sad, because flexible what is this? It's a flex filament. I can't remember what the actual flex filament name is, but it's a flexible filament. It's more expensive, so I was kind of sad to waste this much of it doing this multi-part mold, but at least I remembered / learned some things. So for the other molds I printed out, which was this mold right here that this piece came out of, and then this mold, so you can see the size differences right here. This mold is about half as, I can't remember how deep it is, but it's about half as deep if I recall correctly, and obviously significantly smaller. I just wanted to see how that changed the properties, was the original intention, but one of those things that was just a curiosity, just because I don't make assumptions. Fact of the matter is that it's probably, fairly straightforward and not necessarily. Beyond that, the other thing, fixing my print settings and designing it a bit different. So, for example, this is the base of this between the extrusion, the center extrusion here, and the base right here, the thickness right here, is a specific number of layers so that there is no infill in there. It's actually slightly more rigid, but it's flexible, so it doesn't necessarily matter, So the other thing is that I noticed on this guy over here, which was a really thin guy, that there was basically going to be no way I was getting the epoxy in there after I printed it. So I started chamfering the edges to make it easier for the epoxy to funnel in. So those were the changes I made on these molds, just for the record. They do work. The square mold that I used for this guy, and I'm printing off screen, but let's grab them again. I have a square mold for these guys that I actually printed a long time ago. That guy, as you can kind of tell right here in these missing parts, the epoxy did bind to them. The rest of these guys came out completely clean with mold release. I am using mold release on all this stuff. So this guy, before I poured some more into this guy and the other guy that made this guy, I made sure to go extra heavy on the mold release, and hopefully they don't stick again. But I did have a little bit of binding between the epoxy and the flexible on this guy. None at all on these two. So I'm guessing it was just how the mold release was applied, and possibly that this guy, when I made up this, I actually made this mold up like a year ago and never got around to using it. So it's been sitting around, so it possibly had, debris and stuff inside of it that I did not get all out, and that could be the other reason. So that is all that. So look forward to this guy, because this guy I am very interested in. This guy over here, I think it's going to be really cool. It's just one of those things. This was only intended to be an introduction to an idea, and all of a sudden it's turned into a big old production, which I'm kind of okay with because it's really cool. But we could be on our way by now. So that is all the projects I've been working on this past week. As for the rest of today, streams for today, I was thinking we'd go back to the deck box. We kind of abandoned that project, so I will probably this afternoon after lunch be doing the deck box, the mechanical deck box stream. I will look at it before I go online just to make sure that I remember how everything works and that I have a clearer idea of where I'm going with this. But I'm thinking that will probably be it, because again, this guy is waiting at least till tomorrow, and this guy's waiting till the last part shows up, because again, as of this morning, before I came on stream today to talk to you guys, these pieces were now working correctly. So all I'm really working on or waiting for is, well, two things. One, I got to print the electronic box to house this stuff, which is no big deal. It's just printing. And B, the last piece that I'm waiting for to polish it off. So that is where we're at. And then obviously controller will happen whenever I get the time to fix the micro switch positioning. I didn't mention this, but I did go back and do a minor change to how I was doing the buttons, how I had the button set up on the inside of the handle, just to make it cleaner, because I kind of hodgepodged that one and it was kind of ridiculous looking. So yep, that would be everything. Also, you can kind of see this on the stream, I just realized. So anyway, look forward to this guy. This guy will be fun. This guy's coming. So minor teaser for today. And yeah, that is everything that I can think of that I was working on this week, which is what, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different projects, kind of 5.5 if you count the test pieces I did for this guy, just to make sure I had the correct measurements. So 5.5 projects this week in my free time, on top of being busy. So not bad, not bad. So yeah, anyway, look forward to all this stuff coming to fruition this next coming week. And until we come back on after lunch for the deck box stream, I hope you guys have a great and wonderful day, afternoon, or evening wherever in the world, and I will catch you next time.